Welcome to the Stack of Stats podcast. I'm Pam Maldonado, and I am bringing you all the analytics behind the ATP bets. Today with me, I'm super excited because it is clay court season in the ATP, and I have with me Gill, host of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network and host of the Monday Match Analysis on YouTube. What's up, man? I'm so happy to have you on because I love tennis. You love tennis. You're definitely one of my favorite people. So thanks for joining me today. How excited are you for clay court?
I'm pumped. Always a pleasure to be on. Keep up I feel like your audience is a nice mix of a couple of other interests, obviously, with the football and everything. You're bringing people to tennis. Keep doing the good work.
I know. The messages that I love to receive are like, I never cared for tennis until I started following you, or like I fell back in love with tennis after staying away from so long. And I definitely feel like that gives me the good feels because like I know that betting is fun. And yes, I am a betting analyst and I am supposed to tell you how to make your money betting on which team and which sport and which player. But there's just something so pure about tennis that you just don't get from any other sport on the planet, at least not for me. It's exciting. It is thrilling. There's upsets that happen all the time. You have players that you've seen their careers from the start to finish. They've been in here for 10, 15 years, or they've been around for a couple of years and now they're starting to shine. I mean, there's just like so much about one guy versus one guy from 80 feet across who somebody said that it was like boxing from 80 feet across. And it's beautiful. Just like tennis is pure.
Yes. Well said. And yeah, those are the best messages. That's kind of one of the main reasons you get into this kind of thing. So yeah.
Maybe a little too much. You can tell that I'm definitely like obsessed, but it's okay. It is what it is. You have to follow what it is that you love to do. And God dang it, I love tennis. So let's talk about Monte-Carlo Masters. That is the ATP 1000, the first clay court big event of the season. You have a couple of clay courts happening right now. You have ATP Houston, which is a bunch of like hard court players who don't really want to travel to Europe. So they're playing in Houston. You have the Nick Kyrgios, you have the Opelka and Isners, but then you also have ATP Marrakesh. Felix Auger-Aliassime, he was the favorite. He ended up bowing out early. But now we have ATP 1000. This is the big one, the one in Monte Carlo. Courts that I've actually played on. So I have like a special connection to this tournament because I was very fortunate to have traveled to Monaco for work back in 2016. And I was like, I'm going to play on these courts. And so I showed up every single day. I was like, I'm going to play with somebody. They paired me up with a guy who liked to come by himself and do pickup tennis. And it is just absolutely beautiful. I can't imagine too many people have been to Monaco, but it just like overlooks the Mediterranean. The court is like pristine, actual clay. It's perfect. It's one of my favorite tournaments, not just because I played, but I mean just the atmosphere, everything
it's
about
beautiful.
it. It is.
It's beautiful. That's bucket list for me. There's no doubt about it. I've wanted to play on those courts.
And I got to play for like 3 days straight, and it was awesome. It was such a great experience. But it is Monte-Carlo Masters in Monaco. Now let's talk about clay because a lot of people are unfamiliar with clay compared to that of hard court. Everybody knows hard court. It's the most popular. It's what you have at the US Open, the Australian Open, the big tournaments. These are what it gets known for. But looking at clay, it's a very different type of game. The style of play, the players who excel here is just very different. So can you tell me about like the dynamic of play, how the strategy for a player and even for betting, how it compares to that of something like hard court?
Generally speaking, I would say you have a slower bounce and you have a higher bounce, and the court reacts well to spin, less so than a lot of other surfaces where when you hit flat, the ball's going to kind of skid through the court and not lose a lot of speed. On clay, that ball's going to lose a ton of speed, especially if it's flat. If you hit heavy topspin, you're going to get that lively jump off the court. So you see a higher importance on topspin, and that includes on the serve, on a kick serve versus a player who hits a lot of slice or a lot of flat serving. You see, in general, longer rallies because the speed of the serve is taken away, is blunted by the court surface. It's also a surface where the movement changes because you don't have that traction. You have the ability to slide instead. And as a result, you have players who feel very natural moving on the surface. A lot of European players, they grow up on the surface. A North American player, not so much. A Russian player, not so much. A South American player, yes, they will have grown up on clay, generally speaking. So you also have that movement factor. And then what you see is, because of the longer rallies, because of the way the topspin is rewarded, but really mostly it's because it's more difficult to finish points. It requires more of you. Fitness at a premium, toughness, consistency, rally tolerance. However, while all those things are like your classic clay court attributes, if you are able to still have the power offensively to finish points, those are gonna be the best clay court players in the world. So it's not just a defensive surface like it used to be in the early 2000s and the 90s, where it's all about consistency and rally tolerance and defense, but it's still kind of, that's good and that's important. But if you can bring offense like Nadal's forehand has been for the last 15 years, that puts you over the edge.
And that's exactly why you said you nailed everything perfect, which is why Rafa Nadal is the number one player on clay, because of that topspin that he has. Nobody has as much topspin as he does, and it definitely shows in his record. He is outstanding on clay, 13 French Open titles, last one in 2020. He has a 464 win to 43 loss record. That is absolutely insane. That is the most by far in any player. Definitely currently on tour right now, 91.5% win percentage on clay. But he's out. We're talking about injuries right before the podcast. This clay season is going to be absolutely kind of bananas, and I see it being owned by a couple of players because of the amount of injuries that we have, all of which happen to be really good clay court players. One of which is Nadal, stress fracture on his rib, out 4 to 6 weeks that he announced after Indian Wells. Do you think we're going to see him for the French Open?
Yeah, I think the news has been positive. Actually, the timeline, and I don't know exactly where this came from, but I heard that Barcelona was a possibility. That would shock me, right? That would shock me. But I think Madrid or Rome he'll come back, and that's been the buzz, at least. So yeah, I think he'll not only be back in time for the French, I actually think he'll have a couple of tournaments to prepare as well.
Another player that is maybe coming back on tour, not from injury, but from just like his life, is Novak Djokovic, world number one, who's played only 3 matches this year in 2022, and yet he's still the number one player in the world. That just tells you how well he did in previous years to keep himself in this spot. How match ready is he going to be is my big question. He has a 2-1 record in 2022. We all saw him lose to what's his name, Baselli. But that guy was on absolute freaking tear, the untouchable, and Novak was barely coming back into it. Here at Monte-Carlo, he holds a 35-12 record. He has 2 titles. What are you expecting? Maybe not necessarily in this tournament. What are you expecting to see from Djokovic in clay court, knowing that he's played so few matches?
I don't know how much it's gonna affect him in terms of the lack of match play. I never think it helps when players like Djokovic's caliber are off the tour, but I think what we have seen is that it doesn't hurt as much as maybe you'd think. Just like Nadal showed us at the beginning of the year, and I was one of the people who was expecting a lot less from him. And he came back and obviously won the Australian Open and started the season without losing until the Indian Wells final against Taylor Fritz. And, Novak, there's less precedent, because he hasn't been as injury prone as Nadal. So we've seen Nadal come back over and over and over again. Federer has the famous 2017 comeback, comes back from knee surgery, I should say, wins the Australian Open, wins the Sunshine Double. So, it's another one of these kind of big 3 back from hiatus. Let's see what happens here. I think Novak's going to be okay. However, Monte-Carlo specifically has not been good to him since 2015. Post 2015, he hasn't made it past the quarters there. Stunning loss to Dan Evans last year. And I never really feel like he comes to Monte-Carlo with his peak fitness. And, The wind, I think, hurts him. He's not the best wind player, and it's right on the water, right? Maybe you experienced that a little bit windy there. And I don't know, he's at home. And sometimes that's weird for players. Now, I don't know when his residence in Monte Carlo was purchased. I know it hasn't been his entire career, but it's been for quite a bit. But I don't know, maybe that makes the preparation and the whole vibe of it a little bit different, sleeping in your own bed. Really, it's the first factor that I think is the biggest one, where Novak has not been great at this tournament. So between that and coming off hiatus, I would be much more inclined to say that we'll get Djokovic at 100% in Madrid and Rome than I would here at Monte Carlo.
That is great news for me. We'll talk about the draw a little bit later on. I do want to continue on the injuries that are going down the list, because all the players I was hoping to see by now to start clay season, they're not coming back yet, or they're not going to be 100%. And two of those players is Dominic Thiem and Stan Wawrinka. Thiem is one of my absolute favorite players. I've missed watching him on tour. We haven't really seen much of him since the 2021 Australian Open. And I just feel like anybody who plays Nick Kyrgios, you get broken, and just stop playing Nick Kyrgios. Like, either decide to care or not, because you're ruining everybody. He faced Dominic Thiem last year's 2021 Australian Open. It was a fantastic freaking match, one of the best matches that I've ever seen. And then Thiem is injured for, here we are, over a year now. And then he ended up facing Sinner. But here we go. Well, when was it? Indian Wells, Miami. That was a fantastic match. And Sinner ended up defeating him, and now he's injured. But Thiem, he's not going to be playing here in Monte Carlo, but he is definitely, I would say, if you put him in the list of who are the best clay court players on tour, whether they're playing right now because of injury or not, Thiem is right there. There's Nadal, Djokovic, and then I would put Thiem as the second or the third best clay court player, but he's not here yet. Both him and Wawrinka, they face who Wawrinka is playing in this tournament, facing Alexander Bublik in the opening round. Both of them have been out for over a year. Both tried playing, getting back into the rhythm of things at the Marbella Challenger. Both of them lost in straight sets. Thiem is not playing here because he just had COVID after a loss, so we're not going to be seeing him for a while. Who knows? Wawrinka, I mean, I would say he's also more on like the back end of his career, kind of like on the Joe Songa side, where he's going to be retiring soon because his injuries have just kept piling on and he cannot recover to ever be 100%. Dominic Thiem, where do you think we see him, and what do you think we're going to see from Wawrinka in the first round here against Bublik?
Well, I think it's going to be a real process for Thiem. When he first went out with injury, I actually thought it could be a blessing in disguise, because I felt like he needed a break mentally. It's way past that point now. He's missed way too much time. It's not a blessing in disguise. It's gonna, it's far greater. I mean, it's double, triple, maybe quadruple the time that, for example, Novak has lost, especially if you consider that he kind of had that false start. He came back and hurt his wrist again right away on the grass in Nottingham. So, I mean, at this point, I feel like Thiem is it's going to be a big process for him getting back to where he was, and hopefully he gets back to that level. But it wouldn't be insane if he never gets back to quite where he was, because he was literally, I thought in 2020 at his best, he was probably the best player in the world. Djokovic had a more consistent season, but Thiem, when he was peaking, looked absolutely untouchable in 2020. And obviously won the US Open, and then had a bit of a crisis internally with where he was getting his fire and his motivation. So I don't think this is, I'd be shocked if Thiem really hits the ground running here, is what I'll say. For Wawrinka, similar thing, with a lot less kind of potential for long-term success. As you mentioned, the knee injuries have really piled up. It's hard to see him moving well ever again on a tennis court as well as he was, unfortunately. So, he has the weaponry to overcome some of that, at least with the big power off the ground, where maybe he can still be a good player without being able to move really well. But there's going to be a cap on that, to what Wawrinka can do. And I don't think we'll ever see him again in the top 30, if I were to guess.
Right. Which is it's terrible to say and to like think about, because Stanimal, he was one of the best players. And I know that Novak Djokovic holds a 21-6 record against him. But Wawrinka was kind of like Novak's kryptonite when it came to like big time tournaments, Roland Garros. It was Stan Wawrinka who came out on top. Stan Wawrinka who won the U.S. Open. Stan Wawrinka who won the U.S. Open twice against Novak. So I mean, those were like big hurdles that Novak couldn't get through. So he was definitely one of like the better players, and it's just unfortunate that he's on the back end of his career. But I mean, he was practicing with Novak here at Monte Carlo, so maybe that's a good sign that he's like feeling better about himself and about where his game is coming into this after that Marbella Challenger. So what do you expect to see in his first round against Alexander Bublik? Who do you think comes out on that one? Because I have no idea.
Sure. I would favor Bublik. You know, he's got the get out of jail card, I think, in that matchup with his serve. And I mean, Wawrinka likes to block his returns back. He gets a lot in play. But the return usually takes a little while. Bublik on clay, he's pretty good. He's got a lot of shape and topspin on his forehand. He is decently consistent, loves the drop shot as a finishing tool.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a good enough athlete in terms of movement to be the best on clay, you know, or beat the best of the best, but he's no slouch, and I guess Stan really needs to prove it at this point. So I favor Bublik in that.
Another player that we're not going to see here at Monte Carlo is Matteo Berrettini, which is quite unfortunate because he's also one of like the better clay court players on tour right now. But 2021, he had one of the best years of his career. He had back-to-back finals on clay. He won Serbia, lost to Zverev in Madrid. He went to the quarterfinal loss. He had a quarterfinal loss to Djokovic at the French Open. He had back-to-back finals on grass. He won Belgrade and he lost to Djokovic at Wimbledon. He had another quarterfinal loss to Djokovic at the US Open. And then he had an Australian Open semifinal loss to Nadal this year. But since he's only played in 6 matches, he's lost 3. And now he announced that he's out for a few weeks because he's having hand surgery. Even if he were to come back for the French, as good as he is, I just don't think that he's going to be as competitive as maybe what 2021. Do you think he peaked too early? Do you think we're past his peak, his performance?
Yeah, I don't know, because what was so impressive about his year is he basically never had a bad loss.
Right.
And he almost never takes bad losses. He also doesn't really beat elite players.
Right.
So it's kind of, he was in an interesting spot in his career. And I feel like, you know, first he's got to be healthy, because he's had a lot of injuries, a lot of issues. And that's the main deterrent. When he's healthy, I don't know if he really has it in him to take that next step. I don't know that the backhand has potential to get that much better, unfortunately. And as far as his movement, he's never going to be a really quick guy. He's got a lot of muscle in his upper body, which allows him to have such a big game, a lot of mass behind his serve and his forehand. But ultimately, it just felt like with the mobility and the backhand, he's outclassed from the baseline against the very best. And then the players who are able to get his serve back, which are really very few players.
Right.
Those players, they handle him. They beat him every time. And, you know, we saw him lose to Novak at 3 of the 4 majors. It was the same match all 4 times. All 3 times. You know, 4 sets. Berrettini, big kind of burst of energy at one point in the match, takes the set, but that's the only kind of competitive portion. Yeah, exactly. So, he's definitely someone who weakens the field for him not being there until potentially Paris. However, it's not like when we look at, well, who's going to win the French Open? I don't think Berrettini's injury struggles are really going to change that question much.
Right. And it's funny that you mentioned the amount of like muscle mass he has, but it's all in his upper body. I think what we saw from Carlos Alcaraz, the 18-year-old best player of all time, I think what we ended up seeing from him was that little mini break that he took from December to January, from November to January, however long it was, he came back new and improved with his physique. He didn't just build his upper body strength. He had quad muscles like he didn't have 3 months before. And that's something that Berrettini lacks, is his legs are so thin for his frame. And that's why he does have a lot of power with his forehand. And they call it the hammer, and it is great and it is a heavy hit. But he kind of really lacks everywhere else because he's never really developed his lower body like I think he should have for somebody who is his height. So I think that in itself has been a hindrance and perhaps why he's facing all of these injuries now. Do you think that maybe he should utilize some of this off time to kind of work on his lower body a little bit?
Maybe it's interesting because it's a hand injury now, and it's been ab tears, a lot of ab tears, which
Yeah.
happens on the serve a lot of the time. I've never experienced it, but I know plenty of others who have, and it's like one of the worst tennis injuries because literally serving is like a little mini ab crunch every single time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, but strong legs are just so important in tennis. I mean, it's a pretty common theme. Sinner has had to work on it, Zverev has had to work on it. If you don't have strong legs, you're not giving yourself a chance to compete at the highest level. It's totally not optional. So I do look at Berrettini's movement. I on one hand, I kind of want to give him, excuse him because he is kind of a big guy. He's tall. Maybe he's just not a natural mover, and he never will be. On the other hand, maybe he could have focused on it more. Maybe he could have built up his legs and tried to get more explosive in the lower body. No doubt about it, though. That holds him back.
Yeah. Another player that we're not going to be seeing is world number 2, Daniil Medvedev, who had the taste of glory. He was world number 1 there for a split second before he ended up handing him back over to Djokovic. But which is fine. Medvedev is going to be missing the entire clay court season, out for 1 to 2 months because of a hernia. That's not a problem because he's not very good at clay. You have seen him. There's those memes. I do not like playing on the surface. That is Medvedev. You see him like he kicks things. He like yells at the umps. He's like cursing at the red dirt. If you like the red dirt, you're like a dog. I mean, that's just the things that he has said. From a fan perspective, I'm gonna miss Medvedev for clay because of just his antics, and his outbursts are just like compared to none. He's just hilarious. From a betting perspective, also going to miss him because were plenty of opportunities to fade him if he's more often than not going to be the favorite, even though he's not very good on clay. And then from just like a general fan point, it's going to be fine. There's plenty of other players. What do you think of Medvedev missing clay?
I also will miss him. I think Medvedev on clay is just an interesting storyline and an interesting dynamic because, as you kind of alluded to, last year he was a total head case, and I think if he just focuses, he's not gonna beat Tsitsipas or Thiem or Nadal or Djokovic, but he's not gonna be losing to Christian Garin either.
Right.
He's going to be making semifinals on the surface and quarters consistently on the surface if he just gives himself a chance mentally. He did that at Roland Garros. I actually thought that there was a lot of betting value on him throughout the French because everyone was like writing him off completely. He was like an underdog pretty much throughout the French Open against players who are not even close to his level. And Medvedev said before the tournament, "I feel good. I'm ready to go." So I actually thought that was probably the best value on the whole board last year in Paris was Medvedev, and because people were too down on him because of the mess that he was in the lead up. So I wanted to see it. I want to see what happens when if he gives himself a chance mentally and just says, you know what, I am going to give 100% focus and effort and do as well as I possibly can on this on clay and see what I can do here. Instead of being like, this sucks. My game's not, that nothing's working. Instead of being a victim of the clay.
You're right. Yeah. So I guess from that perspective, yes, it could have been nice to see what he was able to progress to. Now that he has had world number one, maybe he's had a little bit more confidence. After the Australian Open, when the world was on Nadal, he did say, I'm the kid who stopped dreaming, but then he's kind of right back in it and saying the kid is dreaming again. So he's been kind of going through like this emotional roller coaster, and rightfully so, with everything that's happening in the world right now between the war in Russia and the Ukraine. So maybe this is like a good little mental break for him, honestly, and then he'll be able to come back from this with even more confidence, skipping, not having had any of the stress that clay can bring with him, and then we'll see what happens with him in grass season. But let's talk about players then that are here at Monte Carlo, the ones who can contend based off of the draw. I'm going to start first with Stefanos Tsitsipas. No, the face says it all. Tsitsipas is one of those players that I absolutely love, but he just does not have the mental game to get. He's world number 5. But he could easily be like world number 1 if he just like I think he's peaked. I think this is like the best of Stefanos Tsitsipas that we have seen. He holds a 60-21 record on clay. He's really, really good. 7 ATP titles, 3 of which were won on clay. 2 were from last year, including this tournament. He won Monte Carlo Masters, but he avoided playing it all. He avoided playing some of the better players on clay. So how much of a win factor, how much of weight do you actually hold to that? But what we have seen twice from him so far this year, in the last 6 months, is he lost to Carlos Alcaraz, the 18-year-old that we're going to talk about here extensively in a little bit. Carlos Alcaraz, he's already lost him twice, both at the US Open and at Miami. He's also lost to Jenson Brooksby, one of the up-and-coming American tennis players. And then his other losses include Cam Norrie and Felix Auger-Aliassime. I have no idea what to think of Tsitsipas. I know that he is a better clay court player than he is probably on hard. I just don't know how to gauge his game anymore.
It's been a rough 10 months, right? He's 3-7 since making the French Open final. He's 3-7 against top 20 players. He should be way better than that. Mm-hmm. Way better than that. And part of it is, I think, playing on an injured elbow at the end of last year. Having technical issues on grass, with the return where he lost to Tiafoe in straight sets at Wimbledon, didn't even feel surprising. Fatigue, also had a tragedy in the family. Then, went to the US Open. Look, I mean, Alcaraz, we know how good he is, and Alcaraz picks on the backhand. And it's just the backhand side is pretty vulnerable against an opponent skilled enough to take advantage of it on a surface that can kind of speed him up on that wing, because if he has plenty of time, it's a much better shot. Plus on clay, he can find more forehands. He can use his footwork to run around the backhand and to hit forehands from the ad court. And then in the off season, he had surgery on the elbow. So was he training? Was he working on his skills? No, he was rehabbing. And I think also that deserves a mention. So there are some respects where you can kind of excuse some of the frustrating play or the disappointing play that he's shown because of that elbow injury. But it really feels like that ends here. Right. The elbow was in the off season. Now there's been time to kind of rev back up. New coach Thomas Enquist. That's all in the rear view. You're on your favorite surface. The time is now. Tsitsipas needs to turn this around. He needs to start beating the best in the world again, which he hasn't done since, in a long time, since the French, really, when he beat Zverev in the semifinal. And again, was up 2-0 against Novak, I should add. It's time for that guy to come back.
Well, let's look at, I think last year, Monte Carlo, I mentioned I'm not going to hold too much weight to him winning that title because he was the benefactor of a really friendly draw. Looking back at the players that he defeated, Aslan Karatsev, Christian Garin, Vidovic Fokina, Dan Evans, and then Rublev. None of those are spectacular players on clay, with the exception of like Garin. He's one of the better players for sure, and that is his comfort spot, but he's still not like an elite player, top 10, top 15.
Right.
So this year, his draw, looking at the draw from Monte Carlo, specifically referencing just Tsitsipas, he has a much tougher bracket to like fight through. He's facing Fabio Fognini. He has Laszlo Gier, Sonego, Diego Schwartzman, Musetti, who's kind of off and on. But I mean, it is still a tougher draw, still pretty friendly for him. How do you think he's going to fare this time around?
I think his section is pretty favorable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I have him. I think he makes it to the semis, and
Yes,
I think he beats Diego Schwartzman in the quarterfinal.
same.
Schwartzman beat him earlier this year, but Tsitsipas that was the first time Schwartzman got him, and Tsitsipas is pretty overpowering in that matchup, generally speaking, against Diego. Then it's going to be Carlos or Novak, likely in the semis. So that's where we'll see him get tested in a bigger way. Him and Djokovic, really fun on clay. We've seen it now a couple of times. They played a tremendous match in Rome, one of the best matches of 2021 last year in Rome. Tsitsipas, I want to say, I think he served for the match. Novak broke him and ended up winning the match 7-5 in the third, I believe. And then you had the final where Djokovic came back from down 2 sets. So, or if it's Carlos, that adds its own thing because, as you mentioned, Alcaraz now 2-0 against Steph.
Another player then to consider is Casper Ruud, who he is really, really good against low-level players. Against in these low-level tournaments, he holds a 78-30 record on clay. He has 7 ATP titles, 6 of which were won on clay, 4 of which were won last year. All 6 titles, however, for clay were on ATP 250 level. Now you're jumping straight into an ATP 1000. He's 5-15 against top 10 opponents. Since 2020, though, spectacular against these lower level players. He has played 54 best of 3 matches on clay. He has a 45-9 win-loss record, winning 32 of those 45 in straight sets. So if this were an ATP 250, I would probably be betting Ruud to win it all. But this is an ATP 1000. I'm going to be looking to fade him at some point in the draw. What do you think about Ruud here at the ATP 1000 Monte Carlo?
I could see the angle, coming off Miami, making the final, especially. I do think that it's a lot for Casper. However, I do think I do have him in my semifinal. He is in a quarter with Nori, Hurkacz, and Basilashvili. He's made a couple of Masters semifinals on clay. He's been in the Monte Carlo semi before. He's been in the Madrid semis before as well. It's been, but you're right. It's been in the semifinals. He has kind of yet to capture that big victory. He obviously got to play Cerundolo in Miami, which was, a big surprise and set him up to make his first Masters final. I really like Ruud though at the moment. He had an injury before the Australian Open, but he's looking to me stronger, faster. The forehand is just a massive, massive weapon. I think he's getting a little bit better with the nerves, and still a concern. He does get nervous, but I think he's starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, like he belongs, and that's what he needs to get that in his head. In the big matches against the best players, somehow it seems like he's had a bit of an inferiority complex at times, and he needs to just find that confidence. It takes a lot of players time to do that. The backhand and the backhand return, especially, that is the major weakness. But on clay, it's just not as big a weakness. It's the same reason Tsitsipas is so much better on clay, because the ball slows down so much. The return is not as big of a problem. So, I mean, Ruud seems primed to me for a big clay court season. My concern is mainly just the clutchness that could come into play. I'm still questioning that part and if it's ready. I know it'll get there eventually, but is Ruud clutch in big matches is my biggest question.
Well, I've always been somebody to say that the pandemic really kind of like offset the entire ATP tennis slate. Like it pushed players back. But I think one of the positives to have come out of it, if there is any positive to have had, is that players like Cam Norrie, players like Casper Ruud were able to elevate their games. I think the pandemic really helped them because it kind of gave everybody an even playing field. And while everyone is falling off to the wayside, these are two players that were able to stay healthy for the most part. And because of that, their games have just like skyrocketed over the last couple of years. And Rude, we've really seen that happen. And of course, we've seen that happen in clay. That is the next step for him, is can he now break the hump of defeating some of these top tier players? And can he get further than a semifinals, than a quarterfinals in these bigger ATP 500, even and ATP 1000 events? This isn't going to be the tournament for that, because if you're looking at the draw, in my opinion, if you're looking at the draw, looking at the top half of the draw, he's in the same bracket as Novak and Carlos. I'm on the same boat as you. That I have Ruud getting it into the semis, but ultimately I have him falling to either Novak or Carlos in the semis, to not able to advance. Would you agree?
Yes. Yeah, I would. I think part of me says he's ready for that big breakthrough. Another part of me says, is it off the heels of Miami? Would that really be the time? Probably not. Monte-Carlo, does play like very traditional, slow, high bouncing clay, which is nice for Ruud. But I would power rank him definitely below both Djokovic and Alcaraz, and below Tsitsipas. And Ruud would probably slot in at number 4 if I'm power ranking the Monte-Carlo field.
So then that brings me into talking about Carlos Alcaraz, the best part. So I've been saying, like, if the big three had a baby, they named him Carlos Alcaraz. That's who it is. I've been, just as you have, I mean, I'm sure a lot of us have, we've been talking about Alcaraz for how long now? He was on my radar long before I think most of the tennis world saw him, when I saw him defeat Goffin back in February of last year. And I was saying, give him 2-3 years. Well, here we are a year later, and he has passed absolutely every test imaginable to him. He has just excelled as a player. He's getting faster. He's getting stronger. He's getting smarter. He has the speed. He has the drop shot. Alcaraz has the slice game. He has the defense. He has a kick serve. There is not one part of a game. Carlos Alcaraz is the most complete player that I have seen in my lifetime of watching tennis. It is absolutely insane, the progression that we have seen from him. He has an 18-7 record on clay. That's it. He's played 20 some odd matches on clay, and yet he already has 2 clay titles. He has a 3rd on hard court. He won ATP at every level. He's able to achieve right now recently what other players have been seeking their entire careers to do. ATP 250 UMAG, that was on clay. ATP 500 Rio, that was also on clay. And then just recently, as we saw, ATP 1000 Miami, that was hard. People are talking about how good he is on hard court because all of his progression we've seen since the US Open has been on hard court, and rightfully so. But I think a lot of people are still underestimating his ability of what he can do on clay. Where do you think his game is most suited for right now?
Yeah, it's so funny because I think the narrative maybe has changed. Coming into the year, people would have probably said Carlos's best surface is definitely clay. And now it's, I got a comment in my mailbag that I do on Monday Match Analysis that was like, well, Carlos is clearly better on hard court. Let's see what happens in the clay. And it's like, well, at this point, the reality is it's 2 things. It's not clear what his best surface is. The sample size is not large enough. It's really difficult to discern that. We know that he grew up on clay, but we also know that he has a very potent offensive game that might be better on quicker surfaces. Maybe. He's going to be a player who's going to have success on all surfaces, is the reality. Because
I think less so on grass.
Maybe, but I think that is because of the serve. If he had a serve, he could be great on improving grass. Exactly. And he's serving, the miles per hour is there. That's, right. He serves fast enough, just needs to work on hitting the spots. Yes. Surfaces have homogenized. the way Alcaraz plays, again, it's a very complete picture. And as a result, you're not going to have as much surface dependability.
Mhm.
If you're able to play in multiple ways, if you're able to do multiple things, it's just not going to matter that much what surface you're playing on. And you know what? It hasn't very much for Novak Djokovic
Right.
and Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer. Now, when they play each other, especially in specific matchups, like we saw with the Djokovic Nadal rivalry, surfaces mattered a lot in that rivalry. Yes. But when it comes to, do they beat the rest of the field?
Everybody else.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's clay or hard court. They do so. We're not looking at a guy like Daniil Medvedev, who has a very specific play style with strange quirks, technically speaking, where it's much more effective on one surface compared to the others. Carlos is not that guy. He's going to be good on all surfaces.
Yep, absolutely. And his wins since losing to Matteo Berrettini in the Australian Open of this year, just back in January, he has since defeated again Berrettini. He's defeated Fabio Fognini, Diego Schwartzman. Those are two of the better clay quarters on clay. He has since also beat Roberto Bautista Agut, Gael Monfils, Cam Norrie at Indian Wells. Those are some of the better hardcourt players. And then he defeated Marin Cilic, Stefanos Tsitsipas, Hurkacz, and Casper Ruud at Miami. There is not a player that he has yet to defeat, except one, and that is Nadal. That was very close. He should have won that one. And now Novak Djokovic, who, based off of the draw, we could be expecting to see a Novak Djokovic versus Carlos Alcaraz in the quarterfinals of Monte-Carlo. I already have it. That brings us to talking into the draw here. You mentioned earlier, and I took note on this. That's like the entire top 25 list, by the way, of who Carlos Alcaraz has defeated in such a short amount of time. Versus Djokovic in the quarterfinal here, you mentioned earlier that Novak has never made it past the quarterfinals in Monte Carlo. Well, now he's facing the best player on tour at this moment.
Since 2015. Since
2015. Yeah. I have Carlos looking at the draw, top half, bottom half. In the top half, you have Carlos Alcaraz, Casper Ruud, Cam Norrie, Gael Monfils, Taylor Fritz, who's having a really great year as well, but he's definitely more suited for hard court than he is for clay. And then, of course, world number one, Novak Djokovic. Carlos is going to defeat Djokovic simply because I just don't think that Joker has the match fit right now. We talked about it, how he's not, maybe this tournament is going to take a little bit of ease to get into it. And then we're going to see him excel here and maybe in like Barcelona, Madrid, and some of these later tournaments. But for right now, how does Carlos just like not wipe the floor with him?
I mean, I'd be surprised if there was any floor wiping, but
yes,
there are a lot of factors here. First of all, this court is ideal for Alcaraz to compete with Djokovic because the serving edge that Novak would have, let's say they played on grass. Djokovic is a great spot server. It's one of the best in the world now, something he's improved a ton compared to Carlos, who doesn't quite hit his spots, who would get hurt off of the Djokovic return on a quick surface oftentimes. Like if you miss your spot against Djokovic, he crushes returns. Right. On clay, it's, Carlos is going to be getting all his returns back in play. So is Novak. The playing field is evened. It's not, serving is not as important as it would be on other courts. This is the slow clay court where it's going to be so difficult to finish Alcaraz. Novak, I don't think that's quite, I think that always provides extra challenges for him when the court is really, really slow. He's a little bit less comfortable. He needs to be great on the forehand side when that's the case, like he was at Roland Garros last year, but it's not always the case that side is firing to the point where it's not an issue for him. And just the hiatus, the calendar spot where a lot of the time he's not at peak fitness at this time. Alcaraz is young. He can be at peak fitness throughout the entire calendar. I also have Alcaraz winning that quarterfinal.
Yeah, same for I mean, like, I think we've already seen him just beat Ruud granted that was hard courts. This is going to be a little different because we're talking about how Ruud is better on clay. But I think his just like style of play, whether he faces Novak, whether he faces Goffin, who Goffin is doing really well as of late. He's in the final. I'm so happy to see him in the final.
He might be cooked though. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm just happy to see him
Me too.
get back to good form. Anyway, so Carlos Alcaraz against Djokovic. I have him winning in that matchup. If this was like a month down the road and Djokovic is playing already having played like 2 or 3 tournaments and he's made the quarterfinal, the semifinal of a couple of these, then I may have a little bit more pause. But because this is the first tournament coming back, man, it's hard to not see Carlos Alcaraz getting through. And whatever the spread is for his games, I'm going to take it. Whatever the money line is, I'm likely going to take it. At this point in the quarterfinals, in the semifinals, the quarterfinals, you also have to think that Djokovic by then would have built up some type of rhythm. So that's going to be a factor of what I decide to take in that match, because he may be blowing competitors out of the water. He has a bye in his first round. He's facing potentially Davidovic Fokina in the second round, and then he's playing maybe a Goffin or an Evans, a Nagut in the third round. I need to see him comfortably defeat these opponents for me to like have any type of pause. But if he's going like 3 sets with some of them and he's kind of starting out a little bit slow, you can kind of tell, like, has he found his rhythm as of yet? And if he hasn't, then I'm going to be all over Alcaraz because nobody is in form right now than he is.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment. I mean, I honestly think that it's a good draw for both of them. It's
Right.
not a very strong quarter. Bautista Agut, not the same player on clay, especially play this slow. RBA is usually a tough matchup for Novak, but probably not as much on this surface. You also have, Dan Evans, who beat Djokovic last year. It felt very fluky. It's not Dan Evans's surface either. You have Taylor Fritz, who's coming from Houston, which is really a massive disadvantage in Monte-Carlo. Anyone traveling from Houston at a huge disadvantage. So, I think we are going to get that matchup, and it'll be exciting.
So then I also have for the quarterfinals an Alcaraz versus Djokovic quarterfinal, and then facing Alcaraz versus Ruud in the semi, and of course I have a Carlos Alcaraz versus Stefanos Tsitsipas final. What do you think about the bottom half of the draw, where you do have some of these other names? You have Tsitsipas, Rublev, Zverev, Wawrinka, Borna Coric is an interesting one for me. Rublev, and then any other Sinner could also be interesting. But ultimately I think it's Tsitsipas. What do you think about the bottom half of the draw?
Yeah, I have the same final as you. I have Sinner though. Out of Alexander Zverev's quarter, you have Zverev and Rublev, who are higher seeds, but I think Sinner comes. And by the way, this is the best quarter. There's PCB is even in this quarter as well, who had his best year of his career on clay last season, looking more comfortable on the surface. Sinner, he just keeps getting injured, but he's not really losing. So I've taken note of that, and I feel like if he's healthy, he is looking physically strong. Mentally, I love how he's using the energy of the crowd now. He is showing a lot more heart and grit than I think he was as a younger player, and he's serving a lot better. He's not reinventing the wheel. A lot of people criticize Sinner for maybe a lack of variety, or you're not going to see a lot of net play or a lot of creativity. But you know what?
That was me.
Yeah, I mean, and I understand that. I mean, it's not untrue, but the way Sinner plays, hitting big off of both wings, power baseline tennis, you can go very far with that. And I think he has worked on the serve, worked on the fitness, mentally tough right now. There's a lot to like, and I do favor him over Rublev. He's got a big backhand edge over Rublev, and I favor him over Zverev, who just hasn't looked good at all.
So then I think you and I are pretty much in agreement with this. Unfortunately, there are at the time no odds for who is going to win Monte Carlo. There's no quarter draw odds. There's nothing listed.
That's
because
strange.
I would assume that it's because there's still some qualifiers going on right now. So not until those are complete will maybe odds pop up on the board. So today is Saturday, April 9th. We're recording this. I would say on Sunday, late Sunday is maybe when we're going to see odds pop up, if any. But I am going to be taking a Carlos Alcaraz future on this. There could be a potential. I like to look at moneyline rollover parlays if the draw is a little bit more tough. But for Alcaraz, he has a pretty fair. It's a pretty nice draw. Other than facing Djokovic in the quarterfinal, everyone on his path beforehand, whether it's Taylor Fritz, maybe Sanga Cilic, I don't see any of them winning. Sebastian Corda is not really a big deal to me right now. Botic, Van de Sancho, he's not anybody. So beforehand, before Carlos reaches Djokovic in the quarters, I don't see any bit of stress to him. And then the only reason to back Carlos against Djokovic right now is simply because Djokovic is out of match form, having played only 3 tournaments, and here we are in mid-April. And then Ruud, we've already seen him defeat. And I think this is just like a really big spot. 1,000, it's going to get the best of Ruud. And even if he were to face Tsitsipas in the final, he has a 2-0 record against Stefanos Tsitsipas. The only player that I could see in the bottom half of the draw come out on top, if it wasn't Tsitsipas, would maybe be Zverev. But I think the conditions for Zverev don't match this. You have the elevation, the much lower. Zverev is much better for like a Madrid faster surface, a faster clay court surface, and Monte-Carlo is just a lot slower, typical clay. And that doesn't suit Zverev very well. But Tsitsipas, if he were to fall, I mean, it would have to be because of a mental lapse. And it would be maybe to somebody like Diego Schwartzman in the quarters. I mean, that's really the only player that I can see possibly give him any bit of grief. And it would be just because he didn't show up that day. Carlos Alcaraz versus Stefanos Tsitsipas in the final. Is that what you have?
That is what I have. I'm not like, I don't feel great about picking that right now either, because I do feel like, look, you know, the 2-0 thing. I mean, certainly Alcaraz has had a plan, which is to attack Tsitsipas's backhand, both in trading, and also injecting a lot of pace and testing to see if that backhand can handle the pace. And oftentimes it has not been able to. There's no reason why that can't still be a plan on clay. Again, it's a little bit tougher to make Tsitsipas hit backhands on clay because of how well he runs around. But, you know, I'm almost thinking like they should be pretty close. And we know how competitive that match was. And I know that Tsitsipas, like with Nadal, for example, Tsitsipas had a lot of trouble the first couple times he played Nadal. He's not the kind of player to not to lose belief. So I still think he would, in that scenario, have plenty of confidence and feel like he can win and give it his best. I would lean, I think, still Carlos, but I don't feel amazing either way about that one.
Well, then we'll see what the odds tell us. I'm telling you right now that I definitely will have some exposure to Alcaraz in the futures market. I would imagine that he's going to be the second favorite behind Novak Djokovic, possibly the third if they place him behind Stefanos Tsitsipas, but since he's 2-0, I don't think that's going to be the case. So if you're getting anything, I would imagine, let's say Novak is probably going to be a 2-1 favorite. Carlos will probably be closer to like a 3-1 favorite. I'm going to go ahead and back that because he's not going to be an underdog in any of his matches until he faces Djokovic. And I can't imagine that he would be a very big dog. And then if he were to get through Djokovic, he will be a favorite to Casper Ruud and to maybe even Tsitsipas. So just because it's a plus money value, I'm going to have to back it. That's going to be my play, my futures play, if and when the odds do come out for that. Are there any round 1 matches that catch your eye right now?
Let's see. Let me go to my slides here. So Bublik and Wawrinka is definitely one that we talked about that I'll have my eye on. Schwartzman, Khachanov, they tend to they've played some decent matches. That's a round 1. Hurkacz, Monfils in Ruud's quarter is an interesting round 1. Hurkacz has been really bad on the clay.
I was gonna say that my play on that would be Monfils. I did my bracket and I have Monfils defeating Hurkacz.
Yeah, I would have that too. And then Djokovic's quarter, nothing really stood out, but you know, I would say Davidovich Fokina, I think, will be Djokovic's first match. He's very talented if he puts it together. I mean,
Yes.
it could be a fun match. There's a lot of variance with how well ADF plays. And then Carlos in round 2. Do you have that? I don't have that in front of me. Who?
It's either going to be the winner of Sebastian Korda or Botic van de Zandschulp.
Right. Okay. And then those are, it's 2 top 50 players. That could also be a fun one. I mean, you just got to be watching Alcaraz and Djokovic in that quarter.
And then at the bottom half of the draw, I'm on the same boat as you. I'm looking at Borna Coric versus Jannik Sinner. That's going to be an interesting one for me because you have Borna Coric, who hasn't been, I think he only has like 2 matches under his belt since coming back from injury, but it's right there. He was definitely a top 25 player when he was healthy. I think he was even like, I know his rankings had one thing, but he was like a top 10 player. Coric had such an amazing game. He was definitely one of the players that was going to like destined to be good things, and then injury. Well, he's coming back and he's been playing well, considering that it's only 2 matches under his belt. Sinner, is he healthy? That's going to be the thing. So we could see like an early exit from Sinner, possibly, or at least a competitive matchup, just because both of them may not be at full health. Or one is coming back to full health compared to the other. I mean, I didn't really have too many round 1 matches either. I am looking for Monfils to get through his first round, and then that would probably be it.
Yeah. Choric's score lines got my attention also. Those were very positive score lines for Borna, with having missed so much time to play really good players as tight as he did. That's exciting for him.
Yeah, absolutely. So then I think we're both on agreement here that we may see another Carlos Alcaraz future in our win in the near future. I wouldn't be surprised. And I'd be happy to see it, because who's holding the really good 16-1 for him to win the French Open? Let's talk about that real quickly. I have a 16-1 ticket for him to win the French that I took after he won Rio. And then I told everybody grab it when it was at 12-1. So a lot of people who follow me have it at 12-1. And now he is the 3rd favorite behind Nadal and behind Djokovic at 4-1. People always say, oh, he's not going to win. It's not about that. When it comes to betting, it's not about, is he going to win? It's not a lock. That's not why we're betting things, because nobody knows for sure. We can't predict the future, but it is about grabbing value. And so I knew that at 16-1, at 12-1, 14-1, which some people got, that the line was going to get worse and worse, because he was going to continue progressing. The more wins that he has, the worse the odds are going to get. And that's exactly what's happened. He's now 4-1. But thinking of just like the long term, if he stays healthy, if he stays solid, what do you think we could see from the French Open between Nadal, Djokovic, Carlos?
I'm not worried about best of 5 for him. I mean, he's physically just a beast. The question is, are there things in his game in terms of consistency and serve effectiveness, and then perhaps mentally when there are expectations, how will that affect him when he can, if the pressure begins to mount? I think those are the questions. I mean, other than that, I think he's a contender, and I do think the U.S. Open is another ticket that I think people should be looking at when it comes to Alcaraz's futures, because he is developing quickly, which means, the major at the end of the year, where, by the way, young players have done the best at, because a lot of the older bodies, especially the big 3, they have broken down by late August, early September. And we saw what Alcaraz did there last year. I think that I would probably be less surprised if Alcaraz won the U.S. Open versus Roland Garros. However, I think he will contend for both. I just, I'm with you. Real deal. Got to trust the eyes. Got to, believe in what you're seeing. I don't think the hype is overblown. We're pulling out the mug. What do we got?
It's my man Novak. I'm gonna have to replace it with Carlos. I'm gonna need 2 mugs now. I don't know, when they face each other, He's always going to have my number one. He has my heart. But man, Carlos, he is exciting. He is fun to watch. What I love most about him, I'm just going to say one last thing about him. What I love most about him is his tennis IQ. For him being 18 years old, he has the mindset right now of a well-developed big three. He has the court sense that you just don't see from these other players who have been playing for years and years. He has developed all of this court sense now in the last 6 months. He knows what to attack on your weakness, and what we're seeing from him is what we have only seen from the big three. Make adjustments mid-match. That's been exciting for me, is that he has been able to, this isn't working for me. Now I'm going to change it up. And then all of a sudden he breaks back because that's what he does. And then he runs away with it. And it's because of that tennis IQ that he has that not really, I would say, anybody else on tour has right now outside of the top 3 players.
Yeah, he's got an amazing feel for where his opponent is and what shot to play. He anticipates well. He obviously has the technical skills to execute on that. He's also very focused in terms of executing a game plan, and we've seen that in the Tsitsipas matches. A lot of players, they lose the script a little bit, or they forget the script. Yeah, I mean, IQ and attitude as well. He's such a great competitor. I mean, point in and point out, he's competing, he's staying positive, and he's focusing. And that it is very rare to see at his age.
I can go on and on, but I'm going to save you the trouble because you see it enough on my Twitter account. Sorry, not sorry. But thanks, Gill, for joining me for today's episode. We are talking about Monte-Carlo. We're talking about all the injuries. We're talking about what we're going to see from clay court season. I do appreciate you taking the time. You can follow Gill Gross on Twitter at Gill_Gross. You can follow his stuff as a host for the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Catch him on YouTube for host of the Monday Match Analysis. And you can follow me on Twitter at PamelaM35. Gill, any final last thoughts?
No, this is fun as always. Happy clay court season. Hopefully for you, it's Carlos season.
It's Carlos season! Right, that does it for another episode of Star Sets.